I'd like to welcome everyone to our symposium on a responsible endowment at Vanderbilt. We're very fortunate and extremely delighted to have our three guest speakers with us here today. I'll introduce them in a bit. Vanderbilt Students of Nonviolence is hosting this event as kind of the culmination of months and indeed years of organizing and campaigning around responsible investing here at Vanderbilt. And this is not a 2012 issue or even a 2000s issue. If you go back into the 1980s, you'll find that students here at Vanderbilt organized around the university's investments in companies in South Africa in the apartheid era. If you go back just a few more years, there was campaigns around the university's investments in Darfur. And then 2 years ago, students, many of them in the room today, campaigned around the university's investment in a hotel management company accused of many labor violations. And so now we're here today, and many of you know that in June, international news picked up a story about university investments in a so-called land grab scandal in Africa, which you'll hear a lot more about today. So the point is, this is a systemic issue, and we're all here to learn about how we can make a systemic solution and a new structure at Vanderbilt that actually reforms the way we invest our money. So that's my introduction. I want to introduce our first speaker now, Jeff Furman. Jeff wrote the first business plan to help Ben & Jerry's secure a bank loan. He served as Ben & Jerry's in-house legal counsel. He fostered many of the company's social initiatives and has served on the company's corporate board for more than 30 years. So Jeff, I'd like to welcome you up. Talk to everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing this. Thank you, folks, for coming out to this. I even going to thank the administration for finally responding to a letter that people had sent out and maybe engaging in this issue with the students. And as was mentioned, this is not a new issue, and it's been going on for a long time. But it's always interesting to me when I hear about that is that most of the investments that you refer to are on the African continent. And so that's been going on for a long, long time in many, many ways, investments in Africa that have required a lot of looking at as to why they've actually happened. And I think historically, if you looked at them from slavery to mining to anywhere else, you would discover that they all said they were good investments to help the people of Africa. So for the last hundreds and hundreds of years, they've been making great investments to help the people of Africa. There are those of us who feel they have not helped the people of Africa, but have helped a lot of other people get very wealthy. I do want to talk a little bit about Ben & Jerry's and my connection with it. Some people have asked me. But before I do that, I just want to resonate with two groups of folks that are here. Those that are seniors who are graduating, congratulations. And I want to wish you a great success in your endeavors as you go forward. And also to the many students that I got to meet already today that are so involved in social issues. That I know my whole life has been involved in social issues. I graduated college. I haven't been in the classroom in a long time. I actually got thrown out of my first college and got a degree in business and a law degree. And from that, I went to work at a small school in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. There were 25 students there. I took a job as the bus driver. And for any of you who are maybe making some career changes or moving in a different direction, I'll be glad to help you out. My life has worked out just fine, thank you very much. And if you need some help talking to your parents about going in that direction, I'm very happy to offer my services. I can put on the suit, I can look very good, and I can come to say, it's all right. Your son or daughter will be all right, just relax. So if you need my help, speak to me after. Actually, when I went to work in that school, that's where I met Ben. I was the bus driver. He got a job there as the crafts person. He was making pots. He wanted to be a potter. He was very unsuccessful at it. His pots weren't that good. He kept trying to sell them. He didn't do that, and he and I became friends. And we both left the school in 1976, and he and Jerry, who I'd gotten to know as well, decided to open up an ice cream parlor. And as I said, I helped him write the first business plan The real story of that is we sat down around a kitchen table with a business plan that I had gotten from a pizza parlor, and we whited out the word pizza. This is whiting out before you had computers. We didn't delete. We whited it out. We whited out the number of slices, put in the number of cones. You know, we weren't all that brilliant, so in starting this thing, we really had no vision that it was going to be that a kind of company. And all we were driven by was the fact that you can do things differently. You don't have to follow the traditional ways of how you run a business. And that was all that really motivated us. And we used to call it the myth of expertise, when people would say, well, you can't do that. You can't run a business by giving back to the community. You can't run a business by having a living wage. You can't do all that stuff. We said that's why we were in business. And we did not have a vision that it would ever become as big as it became. It was never really our intent or part of our plan. So we've been paying a living wage, and I know that's one of the issues that I've seen out on the Occupy thing. Just to mention it now, this is, we pay, to start at Ben & Jerry's, you get $16 an hour plus health insurance. Our company has been committed to a living wage. We pay double the amount of money that you pay, that one pays, that the minimum wage is. It's several times greater than the market rate that they have in Vermont. And they tell us you can't run a business that way. Well, we've been profitable 34 out of 35 years. And we've been doing very well financially, and that's never been an issue. And we continue to pay it, and that's what you get at Ben & Jerry's, over $30-something thousand a year. We also feel it's important that you operate your company and pay attention to your suppliers. We are moving to being 100% fair traded. Which is a fairly complicated thing when you have 128 inclusions in all your products, and you have to try to make them become fair traded. So that's something that we want to do, and we continue to do that, and we continue to push the envelope. This year, we got very, very engaged. We got engaged in the Occupy movement. 3 weeks after they sat in Zuccotti Park, we issued a statement from the board of directors in support of the Occupy movement, because they were raising the issue of economic inequality in a way that I have never been able to raise, we've never been able to raise as profoundly as they were able to do in a couple of weeks. And we really feel that getting that issue out is very, very important. And so we did that. And I just want to give you a very quick look at how we evolved in our own minds. We originally came up with the expression, it's a job to give back to the community. And we realized later on that the only way you give back is if you take first, and giving back to the community really wasn't as a good a way to operate your company, because it meant you gave some of your profits back. And that really was nothing, and what we could really do is the way we ran our company, internally. And that's what we really, really try to do with everything that we do. So the first thing we did was we sold part of the business to the community, which we defined as Vermonters. And since that time, in the early 80s when we did that, we've been continuing to do that work. So that's a little bit of the history of Ben & Jerry's. My life there has been incredibly interesting. I've been very lucky to be connected with it. It all came about from my becoming a bus driver at a small school with 5 kids. So I've been very, very fortunate. I am now still connected to the company. One of the roles I have there is I am chair of the corporate board of directors. Most people are quite surprised that I'm the chair and the board of directors stands up for what it stands for. We've got a group of activists on our board. We are not a typical board. When Unilever, the company is now owned by Unilever, when they come and may sit at our board meeting, they can't believe of the issues that we discuss at our board meeting compared to what they're used to. In that process of being on the board of directors and being chair, I ended up recruiting and have been involved in recruiting new board members to come on, because it's very important for me. The last thing, my last gift or idea at Ben & Jerry's is to build a legacy of the company. And one of the things that I was able to recruit, I recruited Anuradha Mittal to be on our board. I was looking for somebody in the activist world who had a passion and willingness to stand up to multinational companies. And I was fortunate to find Anuradha. The other side of it is, of course, she found me, and I became on her board. I'm on the board of the Oakland Institute, and it's where I first got engaged in the issues of Africa and what is happening. I want to be really honest, I knew very, very little about what was going on. I didn't know there were 53 countries in Africa. I was naive.
54 now.
54, thank you. But South Sudan is, right. See, this is the way it works, you know? 53 out of 54 should get you a B+ on an exam or something. You know, I would take that any day. So I got to learn a lot about what was going on, and I got very involved in this Africa issue, and I really began to understand it from that concept of exploitation of the continent that's been going on forever. And it just touched me so deeply as an individual that when I was honored to be asked to be on her board, and she always said, well, think about it a little bit, I didn't think about it at all, except got engaged. And that was about 5 years ago. And what I've learned about the African continent from being on there and about this land grab is that it's massive, that it's acres and acres, it's bigger than the size of France, what's happening there. That thousands and thousands of African citizens are being displaced and moved off their land and being asked to go to cities and live. That the price of land, which might be $20,000+ in there for farmland, you can literally lease an acre of land on the African continent for the price of a Ben & Jerry's ice cream cone. And that's what's being exploited, and these hedge funds and private equity places are promising 25% return of investments to investors like Vanderbilt and others. And that this is continuing to go on without environmental standards, and that it's water grabs, and it's the whole thing. It's just, from my view, it's exploitation, 21st century style. And I got very engaged in it and feel really committed to the issue and pushing it. And my whole life has been around creating an idea about the economics, what you do with your business world, your investment world, should never, ever be separated from your values of social justice. There is no reason in the world why they should be different places. I do not understand why a university can have a sustainable center here and invest in things that are not sustainable. Across the hall or down the block, however far it is away, it's the same institution. I don't understand that. I've never understood it. We've run our company as a place that is stood with a single voice, and that's the voice of social justice. And if you lead by those progressive values, we've done fine economically, and we believe that that should be a crux of whatever a university does. I do want to let you know that I've spoken in general about the issues of investments in Africa and what it's meant to me in my work. Anuradha, who will come up and speak after I do, is going to talk specifically and give specific information about the particular investment that was made by Vanderbilt. And I do have the, and I hope that Vanderbilt will continue to get engaged with the students. And Dan, I think, will talk about some of the ideas and some of the ways that we can push this university and push everybody to know that when you spend money, when you invest money, don't leave your social justice criteria in another room. I've known Anuradha for a long time now. Since she came on the board, you will give a more formal bio. I just want to say that working with her has been a great pleasure in my life. She's a terrific person to work with. Her bravery and commitment to this issue and to other social justice issues is amazing and wonderful. And please welcome her with a round of applause. Thank you.
So I'll just lay out the rest of the event for everyone before Anuradha talks. So now Anuradha Mittal of the Oakland Institute will talk about our particular investment, as Jeff said. And then after her talk, we'll have a question and answer session. We encourage everyone to ask whatever question you want about it. And then following that, Dan Apfel of the Responsible Endowments Coalition will speak, followed by another question and answer session. So, Anuradha Mittal is the founder and executive director of the Oakland Institute and an internationally renowned expert on trade, development, human rights, and agricultural issues. She was named the most valuable thinker in 2008 by The Nation magazine. And more recently, the Institute, under Anuradha's leadership, unveiled land investment deals in Africa, revealing a disturbing pattern of a lack of transparency, fairness, and accountability. Here's Anuradha Mittal.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Jeff, very much. The work that the Institute has been involved in has gone on for the last few years and has involved an incredible team of people who have provided support and guidance, conducted research. So I speak on behalf of many of those people, including Jeff, and the board of the Oakland Institute, which has been very courageous to continue to allow us to do the work that we have done. I want to take this opportunity to just acknowledge all of you who contacted me individually and then came together as a group. You know, this work has also been very lonely. You know, you might get picked up by the Guardian newspaper and being all over BBC, but you also know the kind of attacks you get. So I really want to thank you all for all of you who reached out, who were at least willing to question and look into the issue. It was not just about buying what we had to say at the Institute, but also what the others would say. So I just want to thank you for continuing what students should be doing, what any academic institution should do, the quest for truth. So I want to acknowledge you and congratulate you that this university is producing students who are going to be really bright, sharp academic minds, which are not afraid to ask the questions, which are not afraid to find out the truth. So I'm here just to present my truth, and I hope there will be questions that you have so you can find your own truth. I'm not saying this is the truth only, but I can only share what my truth is. Because in terms of Vanderbilt and Emergent, that research was carried out by me individually. I'll also be happy to respond to any larger questions you might have around large land acquisitions or investments in general, because our work, which started, has looked at over 50 land deals, 50, in over 7 African nations. So very glad to answer questions, but I'm sure you might be more interested in specific questions around Vanderbilt and Emergent. Before we go into this presentation that my office, my colleagues helped me prepare, I also wanted to say that how I went about this. Well, first of all, Oakland Institute is an independent policy think tank. We work on social, economic, environmental issues that we believe impact our lives, and therefore we need to have information out there so we can have real democratic debates, can engage in issues, policy debates that impact our lives. So obviously we have worked on food and agriculture issues for many years, in fact from our very founding in 2004. In 2007, when the food prices skyrocketed, and in fact between 2007 and 2008, prices increased by nearly 83%. We were beginning to hear about food riots. We were beginning to hear about a new trend which popularly has come to be known as land grabs. We started hearing about food insecure but rich countries such as the Gulf states going into poor countries to access land, to be able to grow food to meet their food needs. We started hearing about the financial crisis with the dot-com world is not there really, the collapse of the housing market. We were hearing about investors looking for the next soft commodity to invest in. And we were hearing about countries such as my own country, India, which is supporting its companies to go into places like Ethiopia so they can find new lands to grow food for exports. And institutions such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, IFAD, other UN agencies initially sounded concerned. And then very soon we found that the discourse changed, that this could be a win-win situation. that it could be a positive thing for cash-strapped poor developing countries, and it could be a good opportunity for food insecure countries. They were saying there were a lot of land available, there was just the acceptance that this will lead to development. So as a policy wonk, and as a policy group, we were like, well, you know, people are just saying that this will lead to food security, that there's a lot of land available, but nobody had done research. So this project started very innocently. We just wanted to find those answers to these questions. What kind of land is available? After all, Africa is not just one country, it is 54 countries with different demographics, different kind of land availability. What about the rights of the pastoralists? So that's how this project started. I should also say that at the Institute, from the very beginning, we have highlighted that one of the biggest causes of food insecurity is that agriculture has been ignored. Developing countries have not invested in agriculture because they have been told by the World Bank, by the International Monetary Fund, that you don't have resources to put money in agriculture. So all the things that Europe has done, all the things that US has done to promote its agriculture, if you look at the Farm Bill even today, developing countries are told, don't do that, do as we say, not as we do. Private sector will take care of it. So we really wanted to understand that. So we have been actually lobbying for investment in agriculture. So we are not against investment. But what we are finding is that just by putting money somewhere does not lead to food security, does not lead to improved lifestyles of people, it does not lead to jobs. The question has to be what kind of investment, who does it benefit? So I just wanted to put it out there that we're not against investment, but we have to ask the question, investment for whom, by whom, and who controls it and who benefits. So with that, we were reaching out to different people. Also, we were very keen to highlight and showcase investments that work, because we all know what we are against, but we want to showcase what we are for. So in the course of that, what are we for? I was meeting with many people, policy people at the World Bank, International Finance Corporation of the World Bank, as well as private investors. Emergent Asset Management started talking to me, and I was always Anuradha Mittal. The email address that they always had when they were communicating was amittal@oaklandinstitute.org. I was always myself, and as Jeff would say, it would take you less than 5 minutes to do Google search on me. I said 5 minutes because Anuradha Mittal is kind of an unusual name for a lot of people. So it was never hidden. So with that, started talking. They wanted to gain credibility. They wanted the seal of approval from Anuradha Mittal of the Oakland Institute. I did not go dumpster diving in their offices to find their documents. They gave it to me. My computer is here. I can show you 200 and over emails that I have from Emergent Asset Management. What I was not prepared for as I started doing this research was to find who is investing in them. Vanderbilt name was given to me by Susan Payne, CEO of Emergent Asset Management. She helped establish contact with Matthew Wright, your chancellor responsible for investments at Vanderbilt University. We set up a phone conversation and we talked. So all that was done thanks to Emergent CEO and the marketing manager, Paul Christie, all because they were looking for a seal of approval, because they're so used to investors such as Vanderbilt and Harvard University not doing due diligence, as one would expect. And before I go into this journey into land investments, I want to share a brief snippet from my conversation with Matthew Wright. I asked him that the reason for him to pick out Emergent Asset Management was because they say that they're socially responsible investment. His words to me were, in April last year, well, socially responsible investments are not our criteria. Our primary criteria is to get high returns through access into agricultural markets. And Emergent proves us that, gives us that. Emergent promises 25 to 40% returns to investors. And that's what they were lured by. I asked him if they had done any due diligence in April of last year on their claims on socially responsible investments. They said no. He said, no, we did not do any diligence on socially responsible claims, but we did look at the economic figures. That's what we care about. I also asked him if he had any special advice for me And he said, well, if you're looking at funds, my advice would be to look at funds that are not registered in places such as Luxembourg, which are in Europe. Look at funds which are registered in places such as Cayman Islands and Mauritius. And I said, why? Is it because Luxembourg is kind of European hangover of principles and standards? And he laughed and said, yes. So with that, let's go into the journey into land investments. And we can control next. So I had met with Susan Payne at an ag investment conference in Geneva in November 2010. It was at Intercontinental, very fancy hotel where you have to pay over $3,000 just for admission. I didn't pay anything. Oakland Institute doesn't have those kind of resources. I was invited by ag investment conference people to be there to make a presentation, and let me tell you, while I was making the presentation, I got booed, which usually does not happen. So don't compete with those guys, don't boo me here. So I met with Susan Payne. While sessions are held on ag fundamentals, most of the business happens in the corridors. So in the corridors, I was introduced by the conference organizers to Susan Payne and Paul Christie. Susan Payne, CEO of Emergent Asset Management then, and Paul Christie, marketing manager. And they said that they would be having a tour for private investors into Africa and if I would like to join. And I was like, yeah, why not? So this first thing that you see here is actually taken from that private plane that they had for investors, and this is above Zambia. This is their prospectus for the investors that was given to us who were on that flight, which was breaking new ground in Africa. And of course, everything was strictly confidential. They are helping Africa. It's going to create jobs. It's amazing stuff is going to happen in Africa. And because we are so proud of it, let's keep it confidential. So at that time, you know, it is a private limited liability, a private equity and a hedge fund based in the UK. But it was registered in several places, Luxembourg, Mauritius, and all that is done for making use of the tax laws and to be able to evade taxes. And Emergent had joined up with Grain West, which is a subsidiary of Russell Stone Group, which is listed on the South African sector. And MWest was created, and through that they invested in South Africa, in Zambia, in Swaziland, in Mozambique. And the plans are to go into Namibia, Botswana. Basically, they will control how food is produced in the whole continent. This is the little private plane that we were on with Anthony Porter on this extreme side, and Anthony Cook. Susan Payne is in front. And some of the investors, the guy at the back with the beard is David Murren, Chief Investment Officer then of the Emergent Asset Management. Very comfortable, very plush plane. I have to tell you, that's the only time in my life I have sat in a plane like this. It was very fun. Till I saw some small plane crashes actually when you look down, so but it was fun. David Murren, of Emergent Asset Management, arriving in, this actually can't remember which place was this, but basically, I think this was Zambia. When we got to Zambia, changing planes to get into helicopters. Yeah, it's very amazing. Investors just drop from the sky, so you kind of have to not deal with riffraff on the ground. People. So basically, all of these people, David Murren, Susan Payne, they come from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. They're currency traders with a lot of experience in emerging markets when they have turned their gaze to Africa. Africa, the final frontier. Think of the Wild West. This is where these cowboys are headed. As they will tell you, and if you have looked at any of the videos which have removed from most of the websites, our website still has Susan Payne's videos. They are very proud of the fact that the land is cheap, the returns are high, and so let's go in. The scary thing is that these are the people who were responsible for commodity speculation, which increased the food prices in 2007. So on one hand, through speculation, they're increasing the food prices, and now they're going to control the resources where food is grown. This is a kind of vertical, horizontal integration that we have never seen. And the implications of that are huge for humanity when you think about food issues. And so this was arriving into Zambia. From the private plane, we were in helicopters where we were told this is basically a huge, big operation that they had bought and nobody lives there. And you can imagine as the plane was descending, children, women, men, they just started gathering our helicopter, and you're like, I thought nobody lived here. But anyway, this is what they're doing, developing Africa. This is from the skies, what they are doing in terms of large-scale commercial agriculture that is coming into the different countries that I mentioned. This is their plantation in Zambia, very close to Limpopo. And this is their tactic, as I say here, through joint ventures, like with GrainWest, they are acquiring land. Through a lot of that land is greenfield. Greenfield operation means you do not have to pay for the land. You usually get it literally for nothing. You get complete water rights, and you say you will develop it. And that's what happened in Matuba. It's a greenfield operation. And they would say that they controlled over 100,000 hectares of land through these small projects in Africa. Also in Mozambique, it's very interesting. There are laws that if it's a $1,000 hectare concession, you can just deal with it at the local province level. And if it is more land, you have to keep going to the higher officials. So it has been their tactic to get lots of small pieces of land so you can deal with it at the provincial level with the provincial district officers and not have to deal with the larger political structures. Just some photos, just for you to kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. This is just a banana plantation that they own in terms of feeding Africa. This is a banana plantation for export of bananas out of Zambia. This is not about feeding Africa or feeding Zambia. Huge, and they are usually located in areas which have been, in case of Zambia, you can see forests cleared down. And as officials will tell you, in the absence of the larger policy structures, I was told by a Zambian official, we don't have Greenpeace here. We think you can do the Brazilian thing, you can burn the place down. So once you've cleared the land, you've burned down 20,000 hectares or 30,000 hectares, you get these large circular plantations. Why are they headed to Africa? As Susan Payne, again, in several videos that are publicly available, has said, in South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of agri-land, arable, good agri-land that we are buying is 1/7 of the price of similar land in Argentina, Brazil, and America. The land that we are talking about, which you often get also for free in Africa, you would pay, according to industry figures, $26,000 per hectare in UK. For that quality of land and what you can produce on it, you would be paying at least $16,000 in the Midwest in this country. In places like Argentina, Brazil, you would still have to pay $7,000, $8,000. In Malaysia, around $5,000 per hectare. So basically, you can go to these countries and take over land because you are paying, as Jeff pointed out, you would pay more perhaps for Ben & Jerry's cone of ice cream than you would pay for a hectare of land. 1 hectare of land is the size of a football field, so go figure. This is Susan Payne. This is the duat of Mozambique. Yes, they say it is legal. They have a duat. Duat is the legal term in Mozambique of the land lease. This is, I have the originals copies that you can actually read on my computer if you wanted one. But these are land leases, a duat that they have. So they can turn around and say everything that we're doing is legal. The only problem is, after having flown with them, 2 months later, I went back, and this time I took the roads and drove from Maputo to Matuba. And it's fascinating because people that you meet whose land has been taken away, they don't have a copy of this. They have no documentation that their land has been taken away. You would think if you and I do a deal around land or a house, you would have paperwork, I would have paperwork. But in this case, one of the parties has no paperwork. And why this thing is important, again, I'm going to kind of keep going back and forth between emergent and the larger problem that we have. Mozambique, when I was back there, I met with the director of CPI, the agency that is bringing in the foreign investors. They have basically leased, they have granted concessions to investors for more than 2.5 million hectares of land. And they say that they have 7 million hectares of land to give away. And I asked Mr. Albino, who's the director, that, well, you mean nobody is living on this land? And he laughed and he said, well, anywhere in Mozambique you scratch the surface, people are living there, but we work with you. We work with you to take care of people. Very interesting when you drive down from Maputo to Matuba, even the side of the freeway has been harvested. People are growing corn. So in terms of a lot of land is just lying idle. If you, any of you choose to do that and go to travel to Maputo for your thesis or to writing your master's thesis or to writing a paper, you will see there's no free land. Even the side of the freeway is being cultivated while these large land lease schemes have been undertaken. The problem is this land is not unoccupied. This is land that people use. This is again from Matuba. They're either growing food for consumption for themselves, whatever little is left, they sell it in the local market. This land is also used for cattle. The way people survive is by doing some smallholder farming and through cattle. So they need the land also for the cattle so they can graze on it. Matuba villages the village looks like this. Some houses look like this. Again, there are a lot of circular huts, children, women. And I'm sorry that they're not here to tell you their story themselves, and it's me. And this is a quote from Robert Albino that I told you, who said that the actual cost of 1 hectare is about 1 coffee. And he was, so you can read it for yourself. It's basically about 60 to 80 cents a hectare per year. Per year, that's what you would have to pay to get this land. So it's really nothing. That is the big attraction to go to places such as Mozambique. However, as you see in this one, there's a hut, and that land is being cultivated by the farmers. They need this land because they grow their food for their own consumption. And in terms of the development that comes, you can see their life, where you can, I don't know if you can see clearly, this woman scavenging through the garbage, which was right there in their village. But they're using every piece of land for their own food. This is what a normal kitchen looks like, where they're cooking their food. So these are people who are very poor, but that land has been their means of survival. When I went back in February, a lot of the farmers, a lot of people were too scared to talk to me openly. So we had a lot of these meetings in the sugarcane field, meeting with the farmers, meeting with the women farmers, hearing their stories. And Emergent, again, is not the only one. Right where the Emergence operation is, in front, there's another big investment owned by MIA. MIA is a subsidiary of Sainsbury, the same family that controls Sainsbury, the big grocery chain in England. In their case, the women farmers told me that one day these bulldozers showed up and told them that the land is now owned by MIA. And they said, but look at the crop. We have been growing our food here every day. And they said that they flew a plane, flying very low over the fields, dropping something, and the standing crop was burnt. That is why they're too scared to come and talk openly, because they don't know. These people have nothing. And they are telling you these stories, hiding in the sugarcane fields. The other thing I would also say, a lot of times we are told this land is unproductive, nobody is using it, these are really marginal lands. First of all, these are not marginal lands and people are using it, that's why they were growing their food. Secondly, they go for land which is close to water. So they are looking for the best land. In case of Matuba, it is very close to water, and that's the big attraction. So there's an abundance of water in the region. And it's not just in Mozambique. This is a photo from Zambia's investment where Emergent is. They always look for lots of water, where they can dam, where they can put in pumps. So once in possession of land, Emergent demands and it gains complete water rights for the unlimited irrigation needed for its industrial farming projects. This was something that was hammered away by Susan Payne to me all the time. Your investment will be protected, because we will get the best lands which can be irrigated for the kind of farming we want to do. So this is, I showed you that village, what people have, and now comes this big project, and they start installing water pipes in Matuba. Big pumps and stuff are being created when I was there. This is the photo from December 2010. It must be all ready and done by now. And this is the big pump taking the water from the river directly. This is again another thing that they're doing in Zambia, where they have the whole dam and water resource. In case of Mozambique, this is the river, all this stuff that was put in by aid agencies, they're able to use to get the water. But what it really means is that the local people who had access to that water, they lose their water rights. Emergent has complete water rights the way we define it in California or Australia, that whoever develops the land first owns the water. So never mind, people have been growing food for themselves forever, have been using the water from the river forever. Because development is seen as what Emergent is doing, they get water rights. So I met with women who have to walk much, much far now to be able to get water for drinking. Not to mention that when you have irrigated industrial agriculture, the use of chemicals, and it goes back into the groundwater, what it means for communities. Their cattle who are drinking that water, who are grazing in those fields, these are communities who are not used to that kind of exposure to chemical fertilizers. So MVest has been very proud. They said that was a two-phased project. They were going to develop virgin land. They call it virgin land because no chemicals have been used on it. So imagine when you first go into industrial agriculture, for the first few years you get a very high return because the soil is responding to all these chemicals initially before it goes into the decline. Secondly, they're going to use the irrigation. So they were in the second phase while they have put in all the pumps and stuff so they can start producing food crops. By the way, food crops they're talking about are growing tomatoes to be turned into tomato paste for export. This is not about feeding Mozambique. This is not about feeding people of Matuba. This is about tomato paste for Europe. This is Swaziland. Again, Swaziland, the investment I did want to bring because share some photos of this company. By the way, before I go to Swaziland, what they showed for socially responsible investment was they pointed out this school and said that they have built this school, which looked kind of new. And they pointed out an orphanage, which didn't look so new, but that they were supporting that orphanage. Going back and doing research, what we found, and I would encourage you to do the same, is that actually the school has been built by Caritas, a French NGO. The same thing for the orphanage was built and is supported by Caritas and not by Emergent Asset Management. They might have dropped off some old clothes that they collected from staff in England, but that goes very far from defining that as socially responsible investment to bring your old shoes and clothes from England. This is from Swaziland, again one of the poorest countries, but if you look at the investment as far as your eye can see, I only saw this farm. And it is so fertile. I mean, you're talking about lands where you spit, something will grow. So this whole thing of Africa being a basket case where there's starvation, there's hunger, there's famine, and you see this, and you see who controls the water and the natural resources, you have to question development for who. Of course, people involved in the project live very differently. This is Anthony Porter, who is no longer, they're beautiful, beautiful homes, overlooking River Limpopo and everything's there, gorgeous. Anthony Porter is no longer with Emergent or MVest. I think some people had a hard time dealing with the black eye. This is entrance to MVest Limpopo land concession in Chokwe. It's very interesting when we started looking at the head counts, and I have all the other details. In agriculture sector, they had created 18 jobs. By the way, Matuba, 7,000 people depended on that land for their survival. But thankfully, with Emergent coming there, now there are 18 jobs, 1-8. 18 people have a job. And you know what a job in an industrial farm looks like? It's menial jobs, jobs that nobody really wants. In terms of security, of course, as their their farm manager had told me, look at these people, they all look like potential criminals. We bring in our security from outside. So this is very guarded, heavily guarded, closed off fences. You saw how people hurt SAR and they open farms, and then this big investment happens, closed off because the local people, they say, because they look black Africans, they are potential criminals. And of course, bananas ready for export. This is again from Zambia. The thing which really got to me about Susan Payne was, which I'm sure some of you might have seen the video, where she talks to investors and says, we could be moronic and not grow any food and we will make money. This is not something that I made up. Again, the video is available. They have removed it. They used to have it on the homepage of Emergent. They were so proud of it. But once we came out with the publication they removed it, but you can find it on the Oakland Institute website. What they promise to the investors is, where somebody like Matthew Wright might get wooed, is the expected return based on the 4-year pilot project is 270% over its 5-year term. And they are hoping to pay a coupon of 8 to 10% per annum. How do they do all this? In addition to paying nothing for land, look at the fiscal and custom incentives. When your chancellor says that the investment that we have made is good for Africa, let's look at the fiscal custom incentives they have. Till 2015, 80% of profit taxes they don't have to pay, after which it is reduced to 2025 by 50%. They don't have to pay for water. They don't have to pay for import duties when they bring in their seeds and fertilizers and John Deere tractors. These are the same people who 100% repatriate their profits. So in 10 years' time, they can sell everything and walk out stealing, pillaging from Mozambique and the people of Matuba, and yet they can tell you, all of you, and the chancellor can say, we did a good investment, so now you can have your financial aid. I was joking earlier, but the more I think about it, if we don't stop US universities from investing in this kind of businesses, we should start a campaign where each one of you who's on financial aid gets to write a thank you note to a child in Africa. What does it mean for the poor Africans? Yes, they do get jobs. Again, this is in Zambia. Job creation has been cited as one of the major rationale for foreign direct investment in land. The Matuba investment project summary and staff, they all promise a lot of job creation with majority employment for the local community. But the targets to be achieved, what is on paper? Words are one thing, but let's look at what's on the paper. Targets to be achieved, this is the agreement they have with the government of Mozambique. In 2009, they had to create employment of at least 18 Mozambican employees from the first year of the project execution and 100 seasonal workers. These are people, by the way, who are paid $1 something per day. The project's terms of authorization, so it's very much here. This is what the only commitment they had to make. And then the agreement says nothing else, what happens the second year. So basically, labor cost is constant because in an industrial farming, you don't need people. The machines do the job. I have the email from them in 2011. I asked them, so how many people are you really working? And they said there were 17 permanent positions in the agricultural field and 85 seasonal. Now that's very important because if you look at Matuba and the demographics of the people, the only jobs they can do is agriculture. So you have created 17 permanent jobs and the rest are seasonal, which is really about brushing and stomping. These are not real jobs that put food on your table and educate your kids or get you health care. 35 people were employed in the security sector in the email they provided. So this is again their processing. And this is in South Africa, where all the stuff that they grow in different countries in Africa, it comes to South Africa, the hub, where it is exported out. So this whole thing of investors and people saying this is good for Africa, we are feeding Africa. No, we're using Africa's resources at the expense of poor Africans so we can make profits and feed Europe predominantly. This is their products, baby vegetables that are grown in the Swaziland farm. As you can see, nicely wrapped up and all of that you can find in stores in England and other places in Europe. There were other concerns as well with Emergent. First of all, the Mozambican government clearly says in terms of authorization that the project has been authorized for a period of 25 years, which was renewable for equal periods of 10 years under conditions. So this is their document. This is what MVest is giving to investors till June 2011, where they boast the property would be acquired from government at a nominal cost. There are people living on the land, but because of the history of places like Mozambique or Ethiopia, government owns all the land. Never mind, you have lived there forever, your ancestors have been there. But you can just get the land from the government at a nominal cost, and it's legal, right? And they tell people it is a 50-year renewable lease, when clearly in the document they have with the government it is 25. And they also boast there is no water restriction in terms of irrigation under this system. So just that, so you know that I'm not making it up. This is very much in their own documents that they boast about, that we can use as much water as we want. We don't have to be accountable. We pay nominally for it, and they can make up the number of years they have. And the result is, you can see this lady who was walking, a few miles had been added to her everyday chores so she could go get water where she needed to for her own family needs. But yes, there's money to be made. These are the investors I was with. Very pleased with how things are looking, that the 20 to 40% returns are definitely possible. There are other discrepancies in terms of the size, which was another problem. So when I went back to the community, they said that they were forced to give away 1,000 hectares. They said, we have nothing. We have never seen our district officials. For the first time ever, we saw the district people come out, Mr. Mugabe. And he said, these people are here to end your poverty. You should sign this document. And so these people were forced to thumbprint because they said they were scared. To investors, Emergent says they have 2,000 hectares of land. And if you look at the authorization paper, the DUAT, it clearly says there's 1,000 hectares. So they're getting money from the investors, and then they jack up the pressure on the communities to agree to give away other 1,000 hectares, which people kept saying that there is no way we can give away this land. We need it for our children. We need it for our animals. We will starve. And this is what the conflict is about. This was a quote from them. Just another image of Matuba village. I know you have not been there. I realize the privilege I've had of being there and talking to these people. I would highly encourage, again, I know you have studied abroad. If you can go to Mozambique, Matuba village is basically 5 hours of a very bumpy car ride. I'm sure there are far worse things that we've done in life to go visit the community. This is again in the village, spending time. This was a family which said, which was in hunger season. This is where they're cooking. This is again their kitchen, cooking in the open. They had brought some okra and other things for the people. They had nothing to eat. They said they had nothing to eat. There was nothing, no grains, no vegetables. I asked the man of the family, and he said, because our land where we used to grow our food is not there. I'm waiting for my neighbors to finish planting so I can use his land to grow some food for my family. They were in hunger season, and I'll keep saying it if you understand. It's not about, oh, I'm hungry, I can walk out and have 5 options to spend $2 and eat something. This is about having nothing to eat. This child who's there, I was pointed out and told, is going to be 4 years old. I have a 4-year-old daughter. And I kept staring at him, and I could not believe that this child is 4 years old. He looked barely 2 years old, with a bloated stomach, worms, spleen, malnutrition. But this is looking at the child and thinking that there's nothing to eat. And I kept thinking of my 4-year-old and thinking, I know what all she has to eat and what it means. This is again the fees and charges. If you want to really go into the fund structure, basically the way the fund is really structured is actually to benefit only 2 people. Now it's imploded, the chief investment officer and the chief executive officer. It was like Hotel California, very easy to get in, impossible to exit. Perhaps that's why your university is still stuck in it. This is the brief that we had published. If you haven't seen it, I hope you'll get a hold of it. This is a part of an overall project. Like I said, Emergent is only one of them. There are too many of them, unfortunately, operating in Africa. And I think it helps when you name a few and you put their faces up there. David Murren, who usually when he talks to people about other countries, by the way, while I'm at it, I might as well throw it in. He started his career in the oil industry in PNG, Papua New Guinea, where he talks about locals as savages. This is as we left the investor trip with Susan Payne at the back, waving and telling the people we'll be back and we are developing Africa. Happy to take any questions. Thank you. I'm really disappointed. I'm very, very disappointed that Matthew Wright declined the invitation to be there. I have a PhD too. The academic institutions that I went to, I've been told that debate, discussion forms the basis of any academic learning. Sure.
So you both basically saying that the research is on 7 African countries. Could you run me through what countries there are?
Sure. We have produced very detailed country reports on Mozambique, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Mali, Tanzania, Zambia, and South Sudan. Thank you.
Okay. So, going by that, the countries that you mentioned, one of the things my takeaway from this is that one of the problems is that it's difficult pricing land in Africa. I'm from Ghana, so not originally. It's difficult pricing land in Ghana because, like you said, the government owns most of the land. But I think that the flip side to this is if you can go in and buy out the land and actually develop the land, deliver returns to investors, I don't see a problem with that from Ghana myself. Why don't I see a problem with that? I don't see a problem with that because it's difficult to price land. There's lots of people on the continent in Ghana and other places that live on certain income levels that if you can go in and actually invest, put money on the continent, which is what the continent actually needs is private capital inflows. So if emerging has started this, well, they might not be developing the land per se, but it's a step in the process. Okay. The whole African continent got $3 billion in private equity last year. Okay, that's private capital going into the continent. $3 billion, it's less than $3.5 billion that Vanderbilt has. Okay. One of the things I have against what you just, I think you don't point that out, is that you could maybe start to argue for the investments that Vanderbilt is making in emerging going to African fund managers. I don't see that. I think that if someone is investing based out of London, they're making the decisions based on numbers that they get. Okay, to make part of your responsible investing is to be on the ground. So if Vanderbilt say has $200 million invested across different funds that invest in the continent, then why not give that kind of money to an African fund manager based in say Accra, Lagos, or
Great question.
Yeah, who will charge the same fees 2% and 20% if that's what emerging charges? I'm not too sure. But at the end of the day, he manages the money, and then he's able to put back into the community, right? Because he lives in the country. He doesn't live in the UK, so whatever fees he's making goes into the UK, into the UK economy. The other side also is that if, basically the continent is at a stage where it's the last investment frontier. Okay, so there are lots of investors that are going to go in. I'm not saying that everyone that's going to go in is going to do the right thing, but part of it, what I want to drive at is that maybe you should start to, as part of your, because I think 7 countries, the 7 countries that you mentioned that do not fully reflect the 54 countries on the continent.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question, and it's an ongoing project. So we started with 7, and let me tell you why we picked those 7, and before I, address the very important question you asked. We picked the 7 countries because we were trying to kind of cover both north, south, east, west, some of that to kind of start off. And when we started off, we thought it would be a very straightforward project. We want to understand, you walk up to, the land ministry, or go up to the Zambia Development Agency, or you go to the Tanzania Investment Center, you look at the land deals, you get all the information. What we realized was that absolute lack of transparency. The contracts, the deals that we put out there have never been made available before because you can't get hold of them. The communities whose land has been taken away, they don't have copies of it. So it's been a pretty mammoth, huge exercise. Can I finish, please? Thank you very much. So it was almost really impossible to get hold of those documents. So anyway, we started with 7, and it's an ongoing project. And definitely, as I said, we started with this because Tanzania does not look like Zambia. The reality of Sierra Leone as a small country is very different from Ethiopia or South Sudan, which are much larger, much large land. So all of that. In terms of your question, in terms of why would you put in a fund and why not propose that you give it to Africa land managers, main thing is, because that's not a solution we would put forward. The questions that we're trying to get at is who owns that land? As you just said, in case of, it really varies in different places. In case of Zambia, 94% of the land is customary land. That means it is in the hands of communities. The World Bank, the international donor community, the private sector is very keen to bring that out and make it marketable. When it is customary, the commons, it has no dollar value, no bank will fund it, but the minute you make it marketable, put it, give it to a private investor, the money comes in. That's the economy that we live in. Tanzania, the same thing, there's a lot of land available, but within that adding up, they have not looked at the pastoralists. The pastoralists who need the land, whether it's in South Sudan, whether it's in Ethiopia, whether it's in Tanzania, where you need those corridors to move, and if you take those corridors away, you destroy a way of life. And not just a way of life, I'm not trying to romanticize the pastoralist way of life. You destroy life itself because these people are not used to and don't know how to deal with living in the cities. In case of Ethiopia, for instance, where like Mozambique, most of the land is owned by the government. Civil war Mozambique, the government came in power, it has socialist tendencies, both of these governments, so they control the land. But in this case, when you look at South Omo, the same kind of large-scale developments that are taking place, indigenous communities that have had no interaction with the outside world, who would be so vulnerable to diseases and everything else that comes with it. Think of the reservations in this country. Think of the American Indians, the Native Americans, what happened to them. That's a reality for them, where Avatar is no longer a Hollywood movie, it is being played out. In terms of Africa, if you're talking about food security and you're talking about job creation, 90% or over 90% of the population is in agriculture, which works on 1, 2, 3, 4 acres of land. So when you put in this large-scale industrial agriculture, on one hand you take away the land from them that they have no legal rights to. Legal rights the way the West understands private property. So you're talking about imposing the private property concept of the West and your legal land title into a continent where people have not had that. They have had ancestral rights, they have had commons rights, they have had communal rights. So you get rid of all of that. The question for you would be, how would you ensure livelihoods and protection of those people? Or you might say if they're not successful because they cannot develop it with the large fancy irrigation systems and all of that, even if you forget the cost to the environment and all of that. Let's talk about what kind of employment will these people do? Where will they go? Where will these people go? Nobody likes to leave home, but where will these people go? What kind of jobs are they going to do? Where will they move on to? You're from Ghana, I ask you. What is your employment rate in your country? What is the grand scheme for creating employment if you really want to develop? I can tell you the story of my country, India, where people who have been forced out of land, they go to cities such as Delhi, Mumbai, and you can meet young men from the age of 20 to 38, and they'll have a scar when they've sold a kidney. There is a better future for the continent of Africa, like there's a better future for Asia and my country. So that's why I don't like the game of the fund managers. Having said that, yes, investment in agriculture is needed. If I had the money, Vanderbilt, what would I be asking Vanderbilt to do? If your goal is really to do investment which is good for Africa, where you can hold your head high, where your alumni feel like I want to give more money to my university because it's doing this, put money in projects which would provide market access, which would provide infrastructure to the smallholder farmers. All the things that the smallholder farmers in Africa don't have because the governments were told not to invest in it. You can do that. You can invest in a fund which is working with, which has a great outgrower scheme. That means farmers have come together in a cooperative, the fund is working with them, they own the land, they are assured a fair trade price, so they do well, so everyone along the chain does well. That's where Vanderbilt can invest in. That's how you can promote agriculture too in Africa and develop agriculture.
But I mean, my point was that if you want to encourage responsible endowment, right? So if one of the things that you can start to do is that encourage the endowments to invest in an African fund like because the continent will need the private capital. What we I mean, one of the things that people in this room might not understand, and I've lived in Ghana for 17 years prior to moving to the States, it's that there is lack of capital. He mentioned that he helped write a business plan for Ben and Jerry's, be able to get back loan, right? And in Ghana, that's like impossible.
No, one is not saying
So-
it's not needed. Sorry, I'm just getting looks here too. If there are other questions or that Dan has to speak, and perhaps he'll get into it.
Sure.
But just to keep focusing on, yes, Ghana needs investment. Whole continent needs capital. And it comes back to capital by whom, for what? I mean, yeah. I mean, David Murrin would say we are going to go to war with China. We are going to need capital to make weapons of mass destruction. The answer is capital for what, how it is deployed, who controls it, and whose lives are made better. That is the question that has to be asked. We are not debating Africa needs capital or not. I think we are in agreement there. Africa needs capital. Capital controlled by who and for what.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question for Anuradha, and then we have to
Or
go on
for
to
Jeff, either of us.
Besides making sure that Vanderbilt stayed, or at least trying to get Vanderbilt to become socially responsible in its own investments, and once it does, making sure that it stays so, is there anything that we as students can do?
Well, you know, it's, I just want to say Vanderbilt is not the only university. This is by chance that we
Right.
found out that Vanderbilt is involved in a private equity fund. It's not the only one. There are many others. If you look at Ag Investment Conference, a lot of fund managers of universities, foundations are going there because they're looking for high returns. They have nothing to do with agriculture. What can students do? Of course, the first thing is we can clean up our house. That's the first thing you do. You know, you cannot throw stones at others when you live in glass houses. So you ensure that you have practices that not just you move away from invest, but you also don't invest and you take a policy, because that could have a ripple effect across campuses where students can mobilize and say, if our campus could do it, Vanderbilt could do it, why not us? Secondly, get involved, even if it's not your university campus. Yes, Africa needs investment like Latin America does, Asia does. What kind of investment? I mean, you are the ones who will go on, whether to have retirement funds, pension plans. I hope you do. The economy is, so I hope you do. But you know, the people that I showed you, they don't have pension plans. These are people whose kids are not going to the universities. Forget about universities, they're not even going to schools. So they will not have the kind of power you have to be able to talk to your administration. A lot of retirement pension plans are involved in this scheme as well. So it really comes on to us, because media has done a great job of covering the issue, but we can look at it and feel Ethiopia is far away. We hear about the Chinese, we hear about this. What we don't hear about is investors from the United States, from Europe, which are private equity hedge funds, that have nothing to do with agriculture. Nothing whatsoever to do with agriculture, are getting involved in agriculture. Last thing I would also say, which is interesting, if we look at agricultural returns in this country, in the United States, over the last 15 years, at most have been 5 to 6%. People who have nothing to do with agriculture are getting involved in agriculture because they're being promised returns of 25 to 40% returns. And you have to question, what is so magical that suddenly everyone goes there? What you're doing is building a bubble. It was a housing bubble, and now you have another bubble. When this bubble bursts, the implications would be
Well, that's a great segue to our next speaker, Dan Apfel of the Responsible Endowments Coalition. So he'll talk about what we can do here on campus to create these sorts of changes. So Dan has worked at the Responsible Endowment Coalition. He's the executive director. He's been an advocate for social and environmental issues for nearly 10 years. And while in college at the University of Rochester, he worked on these issues as well. So here's Dan Apfel.
Thanks for sticking around on a Friday afternoon. It's such an honor to speak after Anuradha in any situation. We honored her, we gave her an award this year for her leadership on this issue and exposing the investments of Harvard and Vanderbilt particularly. I'm going to try and keep this short because it's getting late, but I'm going to talk a little bit about endowments and what they are. Can people raise their hand if they feel like they have a good sense of what an endowment is and how it works? Pretty good number. So I will just go over that really quickly, talk a little bit about responsible investing and some potential options for Vanderbilt and other colleges, and try and tie it back a little bit to the work that Anuradha is doing in the land grabs issue here, and also HEI and the issue of hotels. And I think we have two great cases that you can look at when you're making these arguments to the school and to the community. First, I want to tell you how I got involved. My story is not nearly as long as Jeff's is yet, since I've only been doing this for a little while. But I was a student at the University of Rochester, which is in upstate New York, and I was an activist against the war in Iraq, the second war, in 2001 to 2003. And I spent a lot of time marching in the streets and trying to stop the war, but it's in Rochester, going to New York and Washington, and felt after we started the war that I had almost no impact, like I was wasting my time. And I said, where can I have a big amount of impact? Where can I actually try and change things? And it seemed at the time like the war was a lot of reasons, it was a lot of money and powerful interests behind the war in Iraq, and that we could have an impact by influencing and changing the way that money flowed. And what better place to start than at school, which Rochester has about $1.7 billion, so maybe half the size of Vanderbilt's endowment. But it's still a lot of money, more money than I'll ever have myself, right? Maybe someone, if we're lucky in this room, will have $1.7 billion or $3 billion. Please call me. Run a nonprofit. But most of us won't have access to that kind of money, and so it's really an awesome opportunity for us to use the privilege that we all have by going to college, and to take that and say to our schools, which are nonprofit educational institutions that have a mission, to say to them, you need to be accountable to your social values, to the values of the school, whether it's sustainability, whether it's just the social justice, or it's just as simple as we're given a charitable tax exemption for providing society with a benefit, and that needs to go beyond education. We're not going to destroy things on one hand, and like Anuradha is talking about, should we destroy things on one hand so that we can go to school on the other? And I think we need to have our values in alignment as students, as beneficiaries of these schools, and as citizens of this country and of the world. So the Responsible Endowments Coalition was started by college students in 2004 who said, just like I did, our school has a ton of money and we need to be using this for social good and to create positive social change, not just trying to make as much money as quickly as possible and participating in the things that in a lot of ways caused the financial crisis. The risky investments, short-term investments, looking at things on a 3-month time scale, how much money can we make over the next 3 months? And so the students said, we want to be able to help students on other campuses around the country hold their universities accountable and make their investors for the long term invest responsibly. And so we help students who are working on all kinds of issues, whether it's land grabs or sustainability and sustainable investing, or corporate accountability, because corporations are actually spending a lot of the money they make doing things like land grabs, changing the laws right here in the United States to help them in the law, for changing the laws so that they have to pay less taxes, so they don't have environmental regulations. And then we also connect students. Like a great example is that the people here at Vanderbilt are working on the same issues as the students at Harvard and Boston, right? Harvard has the largest endowment in the country. There's an opportunity for schools to hold their administrations accountable together, and if it's much more powerful by working at multiple schools. If you just do it at Vanderbilt, it's not enough, they can outlast us. But if we're calling them to account at every school around the country, we can do a lot more together. I'm going to skip this, we don't have a lot of time. Responsible investing started almost 100 years ago when religious investors said, we don't want to be investing in things like cigarettes, smoking, and alcohol. And has progressed a lot since then to be an opportunity, in a lot of ways, people to take the opportunity to say, both we don't want to participate in things like land grabs, but also how can we proactively think about having a positive impact while using our money, right? Why can't Vanderbilt invest in things like Ben & Jerry's and companies that are doing good for the earth and society? Well, Anuradha's on the board of Ben & Jerry's, and she's shaking her head.
No, I'm saying no, don't say
that. Invest in companies that are having a better impact, and not invest in things like land grabs, and possibly invest in the kind of things in Africa that Anuradha was talking about, the positive side of the investments. So University Endowment, this is a very simplified version, so if you work in the investment office, this is not exactly how they think about it, but it's basically a savings account, a permanent savings account to support the university with a little bit of money, or a big amount of money, but a portion of money smaller than the endowment every year. So it's people give hundreds of millions of dollars, major gifts go into the endowment, and they make returns over that over many years. And then part of that money, it's often 5% of that money is spent every year to support the school, whether it's scholarships, building, professor salaries. And that money gets spent with your tuition every year. So really quickly, this is just a pie chart of how an endowment, how the managers think about an endowment. There's a variety of different kinds of things that are in there. Some of them are just investing in things like Walmart or ExxonMobil, big US companies. Some of it is depositing money in the bank. Some of it is buying land in this kind of fashion, or direct ownership of land. Harvard is one of the largest timber owners in New Zealand. They also own a lot of milk production in New Zealand. And Vanderbilt and a lot of other schools, you probably own timber lands in the United States directly, also as part of funds. You could also invest in private equity, which is investing in companies, whether in the US or abroad, that are not like Facebook potentially, or companies that are not publicly traded. Finally, alternatives, which are hedge fund things, which can be like land grabs in Africa, or also the derivatives, all of the crazy kind of financial products that caused the financial crisis, things that you can't understand. I was at Carleton on Wednesday. I met with the investment office, and they're like, you know, we really have a good idea how to pick managers. And they're like, we invest in derivatives. You know, we don't really understand the derivatives. We can't read the whole contract. It's too much for us. We don't get this kind of stuff. But we are able to know, we know that it's a good investment. We can tell because the other schools tell us it's a good investment also. And so this is, I wanted to bring up, I thought Jeff said something that was fabulous, which is this myth of expertise. The investment office will, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but they'll tell you that you cannot understand this, right? Only they can understand this. They are business people, people who have majors in, who went to Harvard Business School, who went to other business schools, who worked on Wall Street, that you can't understand this. But you can understand land grabs, right? I can understand, after Anuradha's explained it, you can also understand investments in Coke or Pepsi or other companies. This is not rocket science. It is made rocket science by the people who work on Wall Street, partly to keep us out, partly to help make it easier for them to make money for themselves by trading with each other, creating crazy contracts that make it difficult for people to understand. And so I think that's an important part, like Anuradha was saying about the land grabs. Even the school, like the schools that sign these contracts, it's the Hotel California, you can get in, but you can't get out. And it's the people who are managing the money that are making the most on this. It sounds crazy, but they make 2% of all the money you put in every year, and then 20% of all of the returns, which is, if you want to talk about how you get to be 1% really quickly, taking 2% of Vanderbilt's endowment every year, and then 20% of all the returns, that's a lot of money. And that money, that's what's going to Wall Street all the time. Whether it's Wall Street on Wall Street or Wall Street that's in Nashville or in London, those are the same people. And those people and those companies are the ones that are making the money, the ones that already have access to those kind of funds, to the people at Vanderbilt, to the schools, to all the investors. We already talked a little bit about the apartheid divestment, so I'm going to, since we're late on time. But there's a lot of different ways that you can actually have a positive impact from the endowment. I'll talk about a couple, but there's a lot more that's here. One is that you can engage with companies that you own in the portfolio and try and make them better. So BARD filed a resolution and worked with McDonald's and got them to change the way that they use pesticides in their supply chain, requiring farmers to use pesticides in a much more sparing way, which is great for the environment. It's good for the laborers who work in the fields, and it's good for the people who eat the French fries also. McDonald's is the largest potato buyer in the world, or at least in the US, probably the world. Loyola University of Chicago did a similar thing, worked with us on mountaintop removal coal mining, and got JP Morgan Chase to stop financing the practice of chopping the tops off of mountains, polluting the environment, and essentially destroying communities in Appalachia that have had mountains the mountains have been there long before people have been there, and now are wastelands that, like, they're flat, but they have some grass on them, but really can never be reused again in the same way. You can also invest locally in the community. They could take some of that money, invest it here in Nashville to support low-income people, provide fair financial services, just like the kind of investment we're talking about people need in Africa. We also need investment in the US. People in this room can go out and get a loan for your home. But if you live in the inner city, you cannot, and especially if you're a person of color or you live in a community of color, you cannot get a fair priced loan for your home. It is nearly impossible. And so you can put some of that money to work there to support small businesses in those communities and to invest around here and also in communities like that all around the country. I wanted to point out that tuition and fees at colleges have gone up a huge number since the late 80s. If you go up incredibly, it's like 5 to 7% a year. Vanderbilt is probably similar. And we've had a lot of argument about student loans and student debt lately and how bad it is. It's almost hitting $1 trillion this year. And that tuition continues to rise and is incredibly expensive. And a lot of that is going to pay management, including like the people who manage the money at the endowment. But Vanderbilt's endowment is not going up as much as the tuition is, right? So instead, we're just taking this money, and so they're spending the money from the endowment which is essentially, say, over the last, this is 5 years. I just made this like 5 minutes ago, which doesn't have the years, but it's 2006 to 2010. And this is data from the government. They report every year to the education department. But we're paying enormous fees to people that are in Africa, in London, all over the world, and to people on campus. Maybe the investment officer probably make $800,000, $1 million a year, and yet our tuition keeps going up, right? It's not really paying for the price of our school. We say we need to make as much money as possible so that we can pay for school. This is why we have to have huge, enormous returns every year, which we don't have, first of all. But we try, and then the tuition still has to go up at like twice the rate of inflation every year. So when I went to college was my school was $33,000 a year all inclusive, and that was only in 2001, the first year. Now it's like 50 some odd thousand a year probably, right? $60,000 a year. And so it's almost in 9 years, or 10 years, it's twice the price of what I was paying. And so all of that money is going to pay for administration, but is also going to pay hedge fund managers in other countries, and pay them big profits in some fashion or another, even though it's not directly your tuition dollars paying them. And so, I think the most important takeaway here, one of the most important takeaways, is that we really have an opportunity to both to transform our universities and to transform the financial system. If universities, which are huge investors, $400 billion plus in total, start thinking about their money differently and how they invest, especially because they're teaching about it also, there's a huge opportunity for us to transform the way the financial system works so that it's long-term oriented, that we're looking at this from a social justice perspective, we understand the environmental problems, we're trying actually to use our money possibly to mitigate or solve some of the issues around climate change and water usage, and that we can do this as a school and actually have a big impact on the entire world. This is not just Vanderbilt as being in line with its values, but Vanderbilt has every day a huge impact through its education, but also through its money. And this endowment does not belong to the trustees. They'll tell you, oh, it's our responsibility. We have a fiduciary duty to manage this money. This is our fiduciary duty. It's not yours. It doesn't belong to the community, to the alumni. But the truth is that you all are the beneficiaries of this money. Anuradha was saying, if you get a scholarship, you should send a note, thank you note, to a child in Africa. So this money really is yours. It benefits you every day when it pays for buildings and professor salaries. And we don't want to be having an institution that's based on killing people, kicking people off their land, stealing money from people, destroying the environment, all of these different things. We want to have an institution where we can feel good about the money that's ours and how it's being used. This money belongs to you. It belongs to people who could go to Vanderbilt in 100 years if we don't destroy the environment and Vanderbilt's still here in 100 years, right? But instead, we don't think about it like that. We say, we just want to make as much money as possible this year, which doesn't make any sense for you or for the people in the future. And so this is your money. You have a huge opportunity to change the financial system, and you need to do it by holding the college accountable. If you're not going to win, often this sounds like a great idea. Why can't we just do this? You actually can do this and make just as much money as you are now, or almost over the long term, a substantial amount of money anyway. It's not about sacrificing returns, but you can. But when you hear that, you say, oh, this is a great idea. If it were so easy, our college should do that anyway, right? But changing power and changing power dynamics at a university, at a college, any institution, takes challenging that institution. You will not get there just by putting a proposal in front of the administration. I thought that when I was in college. It's really easy to say, we're going to put this great idea in front of them and write 50-page paper. This is an academic institution, and they're going to change what they do that way. But these are entrenched interests that don't want to change how they operate. People make a lot of money on the way the university is investing its money, and they don't want to change unless we hold them accountable, and in some way we put pressure and we force them to change. So I leave you with the job of forcing Vanderbilt to change how it invests its money. You need to push them to make to make this decision. You don't have to do it yourself, but you're going to have to put pressure on them to do it in some fashion or another. And as you do this, as people at Harvard do this, as they do that at my alma mater at the University of Rochester, and at dozens of other colleges around the country, we can change the way that colleges invest their money and universities invest their money. And we are capable of creating a world where colleges don't have to invest in land grabs, and instead they can invest in supporting smallholder farmers in Africa, and that we don't have to come back every year and say, why are you investing in land grabs? Why are you investing in HEI hotels and resorts that are destroying, that are breaking labor unions? Why we don't want to invest in this and we can't invest in that? We should have a proactive, we can force schools to have a proactive policy that will allow us to responsibly invest our money and actually be proud of the way that these institutions are doing that and serving society. Thank you so much for having, I think, all of us here. I'm happy to take some questions, but I know it's a little bit late in the afternoon.
Yeah. Can you talk about what other universities similar to Vanderbilt, what kinds of more responsible investment or endowment structures they have? Because here at Vanderbilt, we don't have any kind of formal investment advisory committee that's mandated to look at the social responsibility of investments. We don't have any ethical guidelines for investments. So what do other universities have, and what is something that we could work towards?
Sure. A lot of universities, even Harvard has, although it doesn't work very well, a lot of colleges have committees on investor responsibility, which can be, should be integrated into the investment process, so they create a policy that allows the school to, it guides the school in making these decisions over time. There's 45 of these. Some of them only, and I'm happy to talk about the practicalities of exact how these committees work at different schools, but some of them just do things that are called proxy voting, but some of them are starting to have a more integrated and holistic view of how the endowment works. So the New School University in New York has created guidelines and is on proxy voting, is sending them out to all their managers. So you can't, Emergent doesn't do proxy voting, right? But this is they're taking a first step towards changing the practices of their managers. McAllister in Minneapolis is also looking at sending questionnaires to all their managers on how they address these issues. And so schools, and the New School actually is looking at creating an overall policy around responsible investing, which they haven't done yet, but they're looking at it. There are a fair number of foundations that have policies and sort of like a statement of beliefs around their investment policy. I try not to use the word ethics too much because one of my board members says we don't have shared ethics in this country. So you and someone else on the other side of campus maybe disagree on what that means. But you can talk about integrity and what does it mean to have a university that has integrity. And so writing guidelines that actually talk about the university and talk about both having positive impact and doing no harm is definitely something that foundations and investors are starting to do. You can look at some of the really big pension funds like CalPERS and CalSTRS, which actually have much more restrictions on how they can invest their money than a place like Vanderbilt does, which for all that they say they're required to make the most returns possible, Vanderbilt can essentially do whatever they want with their money without getting in trouble legally. Because there is nobody to hold them accountable except the state attorney general. So the state attorney general would have to sue them for managing their money poorly, and so it really would take some kind of fraud or real long-term damage. I mean, where I went to school in Rochester, they had the third largest endowment in the country, and they lost dramatic amounts of money throughout the 80s by doing ridiculously terrible investing, and it's not like anybody sued them. They went from being the third largest endowment in the country to being like the 100th largest endowment in the country, or 50th or something. And so that you can do these kind of things. There's good examples looking at pension funds, especially organizations and pension funds in Europe that have really changed their perspective to be incredibly long-term oriented and say, we're serving beneficiaries 100 years from now. We need to create a world where those beneficiaries can live. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, both in the direct engagement, like the simple things like what BARD is doing and what Loyola Chicago is doing, and then much more complicated, not complicated, but much more comprehensive, which is the direction you should be going, integrating these kind of committees that have students and faculty and staff into the actual investment process. So creating a policy and then integrating it for the long term, so it doesn't mean that Zach or any of you need to be here looking at each investment every single time, but that there's a policy and a committee that can govern how these kind of decisions are made.
Can I just add something to that?
Of course.
Potentially only because that's my personal way I like to do things is, and I think it goes back to your question. Your students only a short time, you're alumni for a longer time. And the continuation of being an alumni makes me think about the impact you can also have as alumni. And one of the things that keeps going through my mind is where you become your own, you can set up an alternative investment possibility, scheme. It's possible to really do. You don't have to if you want to contribute to the ongoing well-being of Vanderbilt. You can do it alternatively. And you can do it, as I said, you're going to be alumni, I hope, for 50 or 60 years of existence. So you have a long time to do that kind of work. And I think for me, it's always an interesting alternative. I mean, we didn't want to be a business people like people did business, but we decided we wanted to set up our own to run on a different way. So it's just another possibility to think about.
And then mentioned Facebook a little bit earlier in your presentation as an example of large companies investing, but my question is actually, like, we have Occupy Vanderbilt here as a student movement, but besides student movements and things like teach-ins, would you say that social media is the best way to like urge for integrity in
Sure.
university endowments?
I was just referencing Facebook
Right.
as a private company. I think you need to use all of the methods available, and I think social media is a great tool, but you aren't going to win just by using social media. I think it's a great way to like get people to turn out at things like this, or to get alumni at Harvard. Students at Harvard have been using social media to get alumni at Harvard to like write letters and get involved with what they're doing. But I think you still need people on the ground going to the administration, potentially occupying, using a variety of tactics and strategies to actually create change.
What do you think the major drawback or roadblock is to actually making it happen? Why aren't we all sitting in our seats here? Why aren't we all involved more?
I think
What's stopping us?
Well, the status quo is incredibly hard to change generally, right? And I think it's really hard to change how things work in society in any way, whether that is the healthcare system or how endowments are invested. And I think that kind of process takes a long time, and these two can also, feel free to answer this question, but I think it's just people need to put themselves out there and step outside of like how we normally think about the world in order to challenge the status quo. I think as a more simple answer is that the incentive structures in the schools are messed up. There is not really somebody who is accountable for this. Like the chief investment officer is paid to make as much money as possible, so he's not going to try and integrate responsible investing. And the president is told by the board of trustees, like, don't get involved with the investing, that's the investment office. And the board of trustees is made up of people, the investment committee is made up of people from Wall Street who are getting rich off the practices of places like Vanderbilt. So there isn't, all the incentives are built to favor the current system, and so it takes a lot of power, shifting power, building power, and changing the way people think that are the ones that are advocating for the changes in order to make this happen. I think that's a big one. And so part of the long-term picture is actually changing who is on those committees and who's running the university. So it's not as simple as in the short term. I mean, in the short term, we can do a lot as students influencing those people, but I think the long term is that the people who are making the decisions need to be people who have a different perspective. And I think ideally need to be more representative and inclusive. If you look at the investment committees, and I haven't done a study of this, but when I talk to schools, it's almost exclusively older, white men who have some connection to Wall Street that are on investment committees. So those people both have trouble thinking differently and get paid based on the current system. So, challenge. Well, thanks again for having me. I'm glad I was excited enough to speak. I'm happy to share my information with anybody. We also have summer organizing retreats, which if you're interested, they're week-long retreats where we teach you all about responsible investing and how to make it on campus. And I encourage anybody who's excited to talk to me about those and to come. So, thank you.
So to bring this home to Vanderbilt, this event was hosted by Vanderbilt Students of Nonviolence, but as has been mentioned, there are various groups working on this around campus. Occupy Vanderbilt has a responsible endowment as part of the platform. So I encourage you all to sign the sign-in sheets as you head out so that you can get updates about what's going on with this campaign. But as it stands right now, we have no ethical guidelines for how we invest our endowment. And I think that's a logical first step for us to move in the very near future. So let's get to work.